Hi there, I'm Mike37, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the fundamentals of the toolset, particularly the database, loose files, and where all these files and bits go and end up. So you've probably had a play around with the toolset by now, and you've gone into these different palettes and seen all these different resources, and you've thought to yourself maybe, well, I don't know where these are being saved. In truth, these are being saved in the database, but not all files are. And further than that, you've probably thought, well, why do I have to export all of these for them to actually do anything in the game? Well, there's a good reason for that, and I'll come on to that. So let's take, for example, a head morph. Here I've made a head morph, and I've made him an absolutely enormous nose. Now, if we think about this head morph, we find it useful to use these sliders to change certain aspects of the nose, and particularly with these sliders, many of them overlap and do different modifications to the same parts of the nose. Now that's not very helpful for the game to think about. It would much rather know the exact position of all of these nodes. So when we save this file as an MRH, which is using the file save as, we're making a file which is useful for us to understand and easy for us to come back to and modify later, but it's not very useful for the game, and for that reason we have to post it to local for the game to understand it. And what does that look like? Well, if we open up the MOR, which is the exported version of a head, you can see we no longer have our preview and we can no longer edit it easily. Instead we have these fields, which are much quicker for the toolset to read, and for the game to read. But you can see here we have the exact positions of the nodes of the head, but that's not very helpful for us to modify at a later time. So we have here already a toolset friendly file and a game friendly file, and that's an important distinction to make. You can make a similar distinction with scripts. You can see in scripts quite often you'll get English words like else, if, break, which makes sense for us to read and follow, and we can make scripts much more easily this way, but that's not very useful for the game to use. And in fact this is an example of, despite making it less easy for us to use, the file size actually increases when we do what's called compile it. It makes it into a format which is much faster to run in the game, but is actually a larger file and is completely human gobbledygook. So if we look at a script in Notepad, we can see there's no way we're going to be able to come back to this and edit it at a later time. Okay, so I mentioned the distinction between toolset friendly files and game friendly files, and I'll now break these down into different categories. I'm sorry this diagram is going to get pretty complicated, but I'll talk you through it slowly. The database files. Now these are the things that we saw in the palette window. These include things like areas, conversations, creatures, items, placeables, and scripts, this sort of thing. These are files which you can get into in the toolset and modify at any time, and when you click save, you're not prompted with where would you like to save it. That's because they are being saved inside of the database. Now, you may have noticed that the toolset had a pretty large install, something like 1.5 gigabytes. The reason for that is because it installs the whole database. These are entirely toolset friendly files and are not used by the game in any way, which is why when you downloaded the toolset it was such a big file and takes up so much room, because these had to be all sent from scratch. These didn't come shipped with your game. You'll notice that the game doesn't use these at all. There are other toolset friendly files that aren't in the database though, and I showed you the head morphs as an example. So here the MRH extension head morphs. Other examples include level files and VFX or visual effects projects. Now these are all made within the toolset but are not saved in the database, so you'll be saving them wherever you like. When the game comes to use them, it needs to understand them in a much more runtime friendly format. This means that you have exported. You need to know that these blueprint files are not going to be understood by the game at runtime and have to be posted to local, and these database files have to be exported out. And the way we do this in the case of database files is we export them. So we right click and we click export. In the case of these blueprints, it's usually called being posted to local, and that makes us these exported files, and now we can test them in the game. But these aren't the only files that are used in the toolset and the game. There are some files which aren't made inside of the toolset but are made by external programs, and these external files tend to be used by both the toolset and the game. So there's no process involved here. So these external programs are what are used to make these, and these will have come from files which are not used by the toolset or the game. So in the case of GDAs, these are usually saved as Excel files, which the game doesn't understand, the toolset doesn't understand. Models are often made in things like 3ds Max or other modeling programs and saved in a more comprehensive format than the models here, which are sort of runtime friendly. The same applies to sounds and textures you will have been made outside of the toolset. And usually it will involve some sort of conversion or processing to get them from the external source into the external files. It's worth pointing out, though, that these are all sort of one-way transitions in the vast majority of cases. Once you've gone from one to the next, you cannot go back. There's nothing to be done about that other than to make sure that you keep a hold of the original formats. And for that reason, I'll also point out to you one way you can bring out database files. With these other files, the external source and the blueprint files, these are all physical files which you can back up to a USB stick or whatever, but the database is a little bit more tricky. To get those out, you have to use a builder-to-builder create, and I'll create a dadbdata, which is Dragon Age database data file, which is a physical file. You can then back it up wherever you like, or you can pass it on to somebody else. That's the other use for builder-to-builder create. In fact, that's the primary use of builder-to-builder create, but it's also good for backups. And other people or yourself, if you want to pull that out of the dadb data file, you need to use a builder-to-builder load, which will put it back into your database for you. When you've made these exported files, these are generally considered to be kind of temporary, because at any time you can generate them again. And when you do a fresh new export, you will often leave behind, if you've deleted any of these files and you no longer need them, you'll kind of leave behind residue of old files, which you don't really want. So it's a good idea to use empty export directories to just clear out all of your exported files and do your post to locals and export again. When you're ready to actually distribute your module, you'll want to use a builder to player package. What this does is it takes all of the game friendly files that you're using, these external files and these exported files, and it puts them inside of erf files, erfs. Now these are sort of wrappers, if you like, for lots of resources. You do lose your folder structure, so it is only sort of suggested as a one-time thing, but there's not actually any information lost other than this folder structure, so you can actually pull them back out again. And to extract from an erf, you'll need to use the toolset. And once it's put them into erfs, it then puts them within a dazip file, which is very much like a zip file. But it places these erfs inside of folders, which is where the game wants to install them to. And when you use if you use something like damodo to install your dazips or the vanilla installer, it will place these erfs into the correct folders for you and for the player. So that's very much a sort of player-friendly format. And if you're wondering what these different colors were, I'll show you the key now. So here we've got builder-friendly files, the external source, the blueprints, and the dadb data. These are all contain the most information and are easy to modify, whereas the dazip is the sort of player-friendly format, which is very easy to install, but it does contain the least information, and generally you can't work with it in the state that it's in. So it's worth familiarizing yourself with kind of where these different files fit in. And I know this is a pretty complicated diagram, but hopefully it'll shed a little bit of light on these things. Now, you might have noticed that there are something called a core folder and module folders, and wondered, well, okay, I understand sort of that they do different things, but you don't really know what they are. So the core folder is something which is used by every module. So the single player module will use the core folder, and any add-ins you do will use the core folder. These themselves are kind of the module, they have module folders which only affect their own module. So the single player module folder will contain resources for only the single player module, and if you've made an add-in, it will contain resources only for the add-in. The exception to this is if you use the add-in to extend another module, in which case it will use it for itself and for any modules which it extends. So what kind of things do you get in core? You'll get things like models and textures. Now, for obvious reasons, every module wants to use the same models. You don't want to have to make new models every single time, otherwise you're practically making a whole new game all over again. So models and textures you'll find. Sounds which are used in multiple instances, so things like the clashing of swords, like that'll obviously be used in a lot of modules. So those generic sounds will be in there. Global items and traps, these are things which are convenient to use and have been included in the core stuff, as well as generic scripts for the same reason. And the AI and ability scripts, they're all there if you want to use them within core, so that you don't have to start from the ground up making new abilities every time you make a new module. So what's in the module stuff? Well, pretty much everything else. Everything that's unique to the module. So voiceover, for obvious reasons, you won't want to use the single player voiceover on the whole in your module. So that's in its own single player section, just as if you were to make voiceover for your module, you'd put that in your module section. There's no need for other modules to use it because it doesn't apply to them. Areas, conversations, NPCs, placeables, these are just more examples, and there are much more as well, of things that other modules will not need. So module stuff generally is unique to your module. Core stuff is things that are used by every module. And as such, if you deliberately want to modify things for every module, on the whole you'll want to change the core stuff. If you only want to do stuff for your module, it'll just be things in module. So where are these folders located? First of all, the core stuff itself, the original stuff, can be found in program files, Dragon Age, packages core, and data. Contains a lot of stuff. There are other folders as well, things like textures and things, but data's one that contains a lot of different things. So on the whole, I'll just call these data, etc. The first place to override any of these files will be in your program files override. This is typically called program files override because it's probably the only one. It is also probably the worst place to override them, simply because you don't have a whole lot of control over which modules it affects, and it's not as convenient to uninstall. So when you install things, nothing will be installed to your override folder here, because it's not a good place to put things. But it does actually work if you want to use it. The better place to put things is that affects everything is in your My Documents, BioWare, Dragon Age, Packages, Core, and then either if you're adding things, you'll put it in the data and so on folders, or if you're overriding particular files that you deliberately want to actually change and replace with your changes, you'll put them in override. These changes will affect all modules because this is changing the packages core itself. So you'll see here packages core, packages core. You're actually changing this lot itself. But so what if you only want to do it for your module? If you want to change core things for your module and anything it extends, then you'll want to put it in My Documents, BioWare, Dragon Age, add-ins, and then the add-in name that you've called it, core, and then in data you can add things, and in override you can override things. Generally speaking, if you're given the choice of putting things in data or override, if you can put them in data, put them there. The reason for that is if at any time later, let's say you release your mod with it's all packaged up nicely in one big erf that's 100 megabytes. Now that's all very well and good until you want to replace one file, and if you've put it in override, then it will not be easy and may even be impossible for you to actually override that one file specifically without shipping your whole 100 megabyte erf all over again. If you'd have placed that erf into data, then just one file in your override folder will replace it. So just as we can override folders in the original core stuff, you can actually override your own folders using the override if you had your stuff in data. So this affects the core stuff, but all of these are still core. Whereas if you want to change your module stuff, there's only really one place for it, and that's your My Documents, BioWare, Dragon Age, add-ins, then the add-in name, module, data to add stuff, override to override it. So again, this affects only your add-ins and anything that it is extending. So I hope that's shed a little bit of light on what is actually quite a complicated subject, but quite important to understand what your different files are, where they're stored, all this kind of stuff. You should have a look. I'll probably try and put pictures somewhere. So if you want to refer back to those at a later time, that should be fairly easy for you. Hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching.